Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 273, cover dated February 1991. The cover is by Jim Lee, but inked not by Scott Williams, in fact inked by Kevin Nowlan, an artist that Jim Lee very much admired, and so it raises the question as to whether Jim made a request that Kevin Nowlan ink this particular cover, or was it editorial decision and Scott Williams wasn't available, and so Kevin Nowlan got the gig. In any case, it's interesting to see an inker other than Scott Williams or Art T-Bear ink Jim Lee's work in this period. The line that Nowlan uses is very thin and fine, and it leaves the figures open for color. And of course, this is an interesting design for the cover because we have in the foreground a huge female figure, and we're looking at her from the waist down, and no idea who she is unless you've been paying particular attention to subplots in issues 269 and 270 of the title. It will be revealed inside that it is Lila Cheney, and her speech balloon on the cover is "Follow me, X-Men," or "Professor X dies," so quite dramatic. Let's open this one up to the splash page. And this is an artist jam issue. So we've got 24 pages of story, and we have 8 different artists contributing to the issue. So really fascinating, and also because our inker is Scott Williams throughout. Now this splash page here, we have a Whilce Portacio drawing of Storm in a slightly new design for her classic costume, but it does draw on the costume she was wearing in the Outback era as designed by Marc Silvestri. But you'll see here that she's had a haircut. Well, actually no, she hasn't had a haircut. Rather, her hair is growing back in after the mutate process, and when her hair was shaved on Genosha. So it's growing back in, and she's styling it in a particular way. And that hairstyle just lasts for a short time. And then we've got Jean Grey and Cyclops from X Factor. So Storm says to them, "Behold, my friends, they're in the war room underneath the X-Mansion. The X-Mansion is in ruins at this time period." And Storm says, "Behold, my friends, our world, the forces currently arrayed against us, and as best we can determine their location. The question now becomes, what do we do about them?" So let's turn to a double page spread here by Whilce Portacio, and we see that Cable is with them in the war room. That's rather appropriate. And here we have a big roll call of all of the various mutants involved in this particular storyline. We have the combined team of the X-Men, the New Mutants, and X Factor in this lovely little image. And also you get to see little quirks of Whilce Portacio's style from this time period, like the elongated necks that he does. You can see it most particularly here on Boom Boom. I call it like a Sandro Botticelli style long neck. And also what's interesting is seeing Whilce Portacio doing Cable here, because there wouldn't be very much of Portacio's version of Cable. I think he does a good version of Cable, really gets across the bulk of the figure. And here we have on the globe the various threats that Storm is saying face the mutants in this time period. So we've got the Hellfire Club and Masks Morlocks in Manhattan. In East Asia, the threat identified as the Hand. Anywhere in the globe that they don't know the location of another threat, that's Fenris, Andrea and Andreas Strucker. Down in Australia, the Reavers in Genosha, the Magistrates in Press Gang, and also they're including here Commander Cameron Hodge. Now this story functions in effect as an epilogue to X-Tinction Agenda, so it almost implies, if this isn't an error, that they are of the conviction that Hodge, buried beneath the rubble of the Citadel, is potentially nonetheless a future threat. Which goes back to my comment on the last part of X-Tinction Agenda, X Factor 62, that they should have taken the head and locked it in a vault, 2 miles underneath the earth in order to deal with Hodge. Hodge will be back in a few years' time in the Phalanx Covenant, in any case. And then down in Antarctica, Savage Land, the threat identified is Zaladane. So a few other, ex-villains not here identified as current threats, and one of them, most particularly, is the Shadow King. So he is not on their radar at all, and that is very interesting because Claremont has been building a plot with the Shadow King for many issues before this, and they're not aware of him at all at this point. So the title of this particular story is, I got to go back to the splash page, Too Many Mutants, or Whose House Is This Anyway? And the creative credits here, Chris Claremont writer, Whilce Portacio, Klaus, Janson, John Byrne, Rick Leonardi, Marc Silvestri, Michael Golden, Larry Stroman and Jim Lee pencilers, but Scott Williams inking all of those artists, which in itself is very interesting for anyone who is invested in the visuals of comics. And it's intriguing to see Scott Williams handle pencilers with different styles. And of course, he's well used to inking Whilce Portacio on these first 3 pages, but it will be really, really interesting to see him ink Klaus Janson, for example, to see what he does with John Byrne's pencils, to see what he does with Michael Golden's pencils. Very, very intriguing stuff. So Cable here says, to answer Storm's question, answer simple, Storm, to any, and she says, perhaps to you, Cable, and he retorts, to anyone, lady, with the brains they were born with. Do unto them what they've surely got planned for us. Hit them hard and fast. We got the power, people. Past time we used it. And of course, this is ironic because that was Storm's decision at the end of Fall of the Mutants in Uncanny X-Men 227 to take advantage of the world's belief that the X-Men were dead, that they died in Dallas, and to go to the Outback in issue 229, take over the Reavers town in the Outback and strike covertly from that base using Gateway as their teleporter. So what Cable is voicing here is the decision that she made, but she's come to regret it and has been rethinking it in the past few issues of Uncanny X-Men. And now you can see that we're on to the Klaus Janson pages. So for me, these pages and the combination of Janson and Scott Williams as inker, not successful. I would prefer to see Klaus Janson ink his own pencils. I think that always works best with him. So the art here looking a little sketchy and very much not of the style of most of the artists in this particular issue. Janson coming from an older aesthetic style from the late 70s, 80s, and kind of not meshing as well with the other artists tasked with drawing this particular issue. The artist that he maybe fits best with would be Larry Stroman, who does the last couple of pages of the chapter. So the debate continues here, where Storm asks Cable if violence is his only option, and he says, works for me, doll, and gets the job done. Cyclops intervenes, saying, we're not you. Combat may be your second nature. It doesn't come as easily to us. So Cable makes the case for a more forceful, pun intended, approach to the various threats facing the mutants around the world. He says, so maybe it's time you learned. Isn't that why Storm took the X-Men underground, letting the world, friends, foe, even family believe they'd all been killed in Dallas, in order to give them the freedom to strike at the bad guys with a greater degree of impunity, to put the fear of mutants into them? Am I right, Storm? And she says, it may have been a mistake, my mistake. And Cable responds, then perhaps you grown-ups need me as much as the kids. So when Cyclops asks him, what does that mean? He says, you need a leader. That's clear as can be. Storm's admitted as much. You're a fool to deny it. Quite simply, I'm the best equipped for the job. Cyclops not having any of that. And Jean intervenes with her perspective as well by saying, we're not warriors, Cable, and Charles Xavier didn't found this school or the teams that came from here to fight wars. So what we're having is a philosophical debate about what the various X teams should be about in this new age, in a new decade in many respects, and whether they need to toughen up or whether there's any hope for Xavier's more pacifist dream and hopeful dream. Storm very annoyed at Cable and his take on things. She has an outburst. She says, "Who do you think you are, Cable, to speak so? You know nothing of us, not the X-Men nor X-Factor, nor New Mutants, or of the dream that brought us together." Now, of course, Cable knows all about the New Mutants because he's in effect been leading them since Magneto departed from his role as headmaster of and principal of the school. And Cable just turns on her and says, "Do you, Storm, do any of you anymore? Splintered into a handful of teams, running all over the map, no focus, less direction, half the time doing your enemy's job for them. Could be I'm wrong, I accept that, but it strikes me I'm your last best hope for salvation." So Cable turns away from them and walks off. He says to Cyclops as a parting shot, "You figure you can do better, Cyclops, take your shot. All I'm saying is that somebody better do something." And this, for me, is the origin of X-Force. So out this month is New Mutants number 98, which is plotted by Rob Liefeld. Louise Simonson is gone. Liefeld is chief creative on the title now. But very sneakily here, it is Claremont who is really kind of getting the origin, the beginning of X-Force. It's happening in Cable's mind here. He's coming up with a plan to reinvent the New Mutants as X-Force. So then we get a little comic bit. There's a little bit of comedy threaded through this issue as well. Little comic moment between Boom Boom and Iceman. Boom Boom is dying to get into the bathroom. It's part of the whole idea, like there's too many mutants, whose house is it anyway? So Iceman emerges. He's all smiles. After being threatened by Cable, he says, "All yours, Boomer." So in she goes, and he's turned the whole place into ice, and he's delighted with himself. So Claremont always, capable of putting in a little bit of levity like that, and it's much appreciated. So here we get a very interesting combination, which is John Byrne and Chris Claremont working together once again. Now, what Byrne would have received from Claremont would have been a plot for his portion of the issue, probably the entire plot sent out to all the various artists by Bob Harris or Suzanne Gaffney, indicating which parts of the plot they were supposed to turn in 3 pages. So there would have been no phone call between John Byrne and Chris Claremont, because Byrne, on his part, had from his perspective, a falling out with Claremont and never wanted to work with Claremont again after his departure from Uncanny X-Men a decade earlier, with issue 143 being his last issue of the title. And so it's intriguing. It's interesting to see the two paired again, and to see how it plays out. And there's no action in Byrne's 3 pages. It's all dialogue, it's all conversation. There's something ironic and funny about that, because Byrne was always pushing for more action in the collaboration with Chris Claremont. Byrne was impatient with all the standing around and talking and philosophizing. And yeah, it is funny to think that the 3 pages he gets to draw here are pages of philosophizing, standing around and talking. In any case, he does a good job with them. So a nice anchor image here of the trio of Storm, Cyclops and Jean. And Storm is wondering if removing the X-Men to the farthest reaches... Cyclops makes an offer here for the X-Men to move into SHIP in Midtown Manhattan, which is the headquarters of X-Factor. So he says there, we'll be more comfortable, not to mention secure, aboard our ship. And Storm is wondering, because she's still ruminating on her decision to go to Australia and strike covertly from the outback. She says, "I wonder if removing the X-Men to the farthest reaches of the Earth by relocating to Australia was a mistake. How is it an improvement to shift our base of operations to a craft not even of this world?" But Cyclops continues with his whole point there about how the ship is a safe haven for mutants. The ship generates an energy field that allows only mutants into its interior, he says. Let's continue. And she responds here, creating a little storm. I mean, for so long, when she was de-aged by Nanny into the body of, in effect, like a 10-year-old, she had only the slightest access to her powers with much effort. So it's interesting to see her like playing around, creating little storm clouds here in the palm of her hand. It's almost as if she's enjoying having full access to her powers again. So she says to Cyclops, Cyclops is not the heart of Xavier's dream, the integration of mutants into society. If instead we remove ourselves completely from it, do we not run the risk of becoming precisely what those like Magneto have always believed us to be? An elite, Homo sapiens, superior. And then Jean talks about Magneto and Acts of Vengeance and how Magneto seems as if he's returning to form as a villain. But again, it's interesting that's coming up here because that was Acts of Vengeance was John Byrne's brainchild for a crossover event throughout the Marvel Universe the year before, and he wanted to get his hands on Magneto and write Magneto as a Silver Age villain, again because Byrne never agreed with Claremont in terms of redeeming Magneto as a character. So ironic here that Jean is making reference to this and then saying there are reports of him actively participating in Acts of Vengeance attacks on various superheroes, and most recently in an assault on the West Coast Avengers, Byrne's title in this time period. We have to accept the possibility that he too is once more becoming a threat. But Claremont sneakily undid this in advance way back in issue 254, where we had an encounter between Moira MacTaggert and Magneto on Mur Isle, and Banshee also outside, where Magneto in effect was revealed to us that he was going to play the villain rather than actually be, and it was all part of an overarching design of his. So that's Claremont sneakily undoing Byrne's intentions with Acts of Vengeance in returning Magneto to be a Silver Age type villain. Another error in judgment on my part to trust him, wonders Storm. For all his faults, Jean, he tried his best while he was headmaster here to care for the New Mutants. And Jean responds, he isn't a teacher, that's what the kids need, Aurora, another Professor Xavier. And Cyclops comes in and says, and Cable's it. Wherever Magneto's vanished to, after that last fight with the Avengers, we have to find him. And we'll find, we know, readers of X-Men know where Magneto is. He's in the Savage Land, and that's where we're going in the very next issue of the title. But Storm says Magneto's peripheral. It is Cable and the challenge he poses we must deal with. Have either of you considered that he might be right? Times have changed since Charles Xavier founded this school and created the X-Men. Changed even since he brought in myself and my companions to be the team's second generation. So a reference back to 1975 and all new, all different, giant size X-Men #1. Now there is a third, and we must answer, my friends. Are we fit caretakers any longer for Xavier's school and his dream? Or has the time come to turn that role over to others, as it was handed first from him to you and you to us? So that's the big question running throughout this particular issue. But before we move on from this page, time again to comment on Byrne's art. I think Scott Williams does a really good job on Byrne's pencils on these 3 pages. A very good fit for Byrne is Scott Williams, and that puts me in mind of the fact that some of you might know about John Byrne's continuation of his run, like what happened with Uncanny X-Men after issue 143, his last. If he had been the chief creator, if Jim Shooter had chosen differently to leave Byrne on X-Men and have Claremont go somewhere else, and that is Byrne's project. It's called X-Men Elsewhen, and there was a reach out from Marvel to Byrne to publish those comics. He's done 32 of them, in fact, 32 full issues. And Byrne, like the negotiations didn't work out. But one of the moving pieces was that Scott Williams was going to be the inker over Byrne's pencils on Elsewhen if it had been published, if it were to have been published by Marvel. And so you're getting a little preview of what that would have looked like in these 3 particular pages, and it looks good. And also that's a nice top-down shot there on the trio from Byrne. Good stuff from him. Now moving on, we have Rick Leonardi, who has often been, or was often, the fill-in artist when Marc Silvestri needed to take a break during his couple of year run on the title. Pretty much almost a 3-year run on the title by Silvestri. And so here we are elsewhere in the sprawling underground complex, and we get a hologram call from Moore Isle Research Centre, Moira MacTaggart, calling in to Banshee. And so she's passionately delighted to see Banshee, and he's still thinking that something's up with Moira. Can this be real? At her wildest, I can't recall Moira ever wearing such clothes. So she embraces him, even though her feelings get ahead of her because she forgets that they're a pair of illusions to each other. So she tells him that she's missed him. I've missed you. I want you by my side in my arms so I can greet you properly. And I think we all know what that means. And Banshee responds in kind, I'll be there as quick as I can, just as the Beast arrives in his lab coat. And Banshee thinks to himself, what's happened to her? It's as though the fiercest Highlander side of her nature has overwhelmed all her gentler aspects. So a classic Claremont theme, the fact that everybody is a duality of dark and light. And here, because of the Shadow King's influence, that fiercer shadow side of Moira MacTaggart is coming out, and it makes her more aggressive and assertive and sexually confident, whereas in the past she used to be demure. Banshee is, knows something's up but doesn't know what's going on. So the Beast just in time to see this virtual kiss between the pair. Oh my stars and garters, he says quietly. I always like that exclamation of Beasts. So Beast says to Banshee, not the Moira MacTaggart I remember, nor I, responds Banshee. Not that it's any of my business, of course, says Beast. That's right, boyo. It's not, says Banshee as he flies away. So, and using his sonic scream there, deafening Beast as he goes into Forge's lab. It's a nice top-down angle on Forge's lab here. A lot of detail in the pencils by Rick Leonardi. You can see some bionics over here, but the detail that I like best and that I only saw on this reread of the issue is have a look over here to the top right hand corner of the panel. What is that? That is an unmade bed. That's a pillow, that's a blanket. Forge has a little bed in his own laboratory where he sleeps. So that gives you an indication, that gives you a character indication regarding Forge and the degree to which he is dedicated to his work, and specifically the task of trying to find a way to undo the mutation or the mutate process that the gene engineer wrought on Rain. So I imagine, having seen some of Chris Claremont's scripts, that this little detail would be in the plot that was handed to Leonardi, and he works it in there. Nice stuff. So, what does Forge say about how his work is going and whether the process done to Wolfsbane can be reverted? Hard to tell, he says. The secrets of the mutate transmodation died with its creator, the Genoshan gene engineer. Our gamble is that my mutant ability to invent things will allow me to duplicate his work. You don't sound hopeful, says Beast. I can do it, he says. That's not the problem. It's simply a question of time. The trouble is, the process is akin to casting a mold. Initially, there's considerable malleability. I suspect that that's partly why Storm was able to neutralize hers and revert to her true self. But the more time that passes, the more that genetic lock sets until it becomes permanent and unbreakable. So time is ticking in terms of whether the process done to Rain can be in any way reversed. So Claremont kind of ramping up the tension there in respect of Rain. And now the last page of Leonardi's work, he gets another scene set in the danger room. We've got a training session here. So Cannonball training against Archangel, and ultimately Archangel gets the better of him. Some really nice dynamic work here in the art by Leonardi. And also, I must say that Scott Williams' inks work really well with Leonardi's pencils as well. The training session comes to an end. That's where Banshee flew to. And it's time for a rematch. If at first you don't succeed, Cannonball. So try again until practice makes perfect. And then we pick up with Storm. So after her conversation with Scott and Jean, she went outside up above to the ruins of the X-Mansion. and now we're getting to the Silvestri pages. So very interesting here too to see Silvestri's art, his pencils, inked by Scott Williams prior to Silvestri absorbing and responding to the popularity of Jim Lee, and his breaking down what Jim Lee's popularity might amount to, some of Jim Lee's layouts, bigger anchor images on the page. Prior to all of that, while he's still drawing in the way that he did on Uncanny X-Men, seeing Scott Williams inking him, it's a treat. And Williams does a different job over Silvestri's pencils than Dan Green, but I like Williams inks over Silvestri as much as I like Green's inks over Silvestri's pencils. So we get a little heart-to-heart here by Gambit, but he's being tricksy too. He's packed a bag for Storm. He says it's time to get on the road. He says to her, stick around, you be fixing to be dead for real, instead of pretend like the last few times. That what you want? Tell you straight, Stormy, liked you better as a jeune fille. No muss, no fuss, no complications, knew what you wanted and took it. That kidded laugh at the devil. How come you got to be so tippy-toe now you're grown? So her response is, here I belong, Gambit, here I stay. And there's a storm cloud over her there as well. And again, this time that's an indication of her emotional turbulence. When she is troubled emotionally, the weather patterns around her change. And that's what's going on here. So it's an indication of her inner conflict regarding what to do, go or stay. Here I belong, she says to Gambit though. Here I stay. These are my friends, my family in every sense, save blood. They need me and I them. And this is what Gambit wanted from her all along. Then do us both a favour, share, and start acting the part. So, and it's kind of like with his kind of red eyes there, he looks slightly menacing. And at this time period, we don't know anything about Gambit's background really. We're unsure who exactly he is or what his exact motivations are. He's a charmer, but a bit of a trickster figure too. So Claremont playing around with that as well. And now the scene shifts to the part of the underground complex set aside as living quarters for the ladies. And we have that continuing comic subplot between Boom Boom and Iceman, where Boom Boom is looking to get revenge on Iceman, and he runs straight into Psylocke. So these two haven't really had any interactions really. And Iceman there, taken aback, Psylocke, fancy meeting you here. She says to him, I live here, remember? So he's all apologetic, laughing away there, silly me, of course, how forgetful. And just as he is distracted by Psylocke, Boom Boom pops a little time bomb down the back of his boxer shorts. Away he goes. Jean is telling him about the ice all over the bathroom. So, no, it must be all over the quarters as well as the bathroom. So off he goes, saying he'll clean it up. And that little time bomb goes off in his pants. So that's pretty funny enough from Claremont. But really, what this page shows is Silvestri's skill with comic scenes. I mean, like funny scenes. He's good at that. You mightn't initially think of that when you're doing up a list of what Silvestri's good at, but he is. He's very good at comedy, physical comedy in particular. And of course, the other thing that he's very good at is drawing women, and that is quite the anchor image there, that borderless panel of Psylocke. He's putting it up to Jim Lee there in terms of drawing a sexy version of Psylocke that looks physically formidable as well, because of course what she is too is a ninja, a master ninja assassin, and she looks the part. But now we're going to get an interesting little bit of girls talk between Jean and Psylocke. Jean tells Boom Boom to beat it, and she says to Psylocke, I ask you, Betsy, were we ever so wild? Now these two haven't had very much in the way of history together, because from the time that Psylocke joined the X-Men back around issue 213, Jean was in X-Factor. So they really haven't had very much in the way of encounters together. And Claremont is writing them here like they're old pals, or at least on Jean's side. In any case, Jean here goes for a shower, and what I always liked about this particular panel is that slight Dutch angle there, which really just gives a little bit of additional interest to the panel instead of having it straight on. And that's something that Silvestri is good at, keeping the visuals interesting by tilting the camera, by moving the camera around. And now we're in the shower, but of course with strategically placed steam so that we don't get an eyeful of Jean's, how shall I put it, her assets. But she's continuing her conversation there with Psylocke. Tell me, have you called your brother yet? So Claremont thinking about, the personal, always thinking about the personal lives of these characters. And that is a question that would have been on some reader's mind. And this is Psylocke's response. And say what? Hello, twin. Guess who this is? Back from the dead, just like you. Remember last time we met and you couldn't believe I had purple hair? Well, the hair is still purple. It's everything else that's changed. So Jean asks, it can't be fixed. The hand used magic as well as medicine to do the job. Even Forge can't puzzle out quite how. What's still in doubt is whether their work went simply skin deep. Jean asks, what do you mean? The hand brainwashed me into becoming their master assassin, and no one's quite sure if I'm wholly free of their influence. They've only Wolverine's word for that, and I like this little transition. I like the close-up on Psylocke's eye, and no one's quite sure of him anymore, and that little line as well, because Claremont's playing around with the question as to whether Psylocke is 100% her old self, or whether any of that hand programming remains within her. Jubilee is suspicious of her, Wolverine not, but Wolverine isn't 100% himself anymore. And that's a nice transition to Wolverine, to the man himself, and Michael Golden's section of the Jam issue. So it's the Danger Room again, another training sequence. This time we have Wolverine facing off against Gambit, a nice split panel there where Wolverine misses Gambit, and Gambit looks as if he's about to boot at Wolverine in the head. And both of them kind of engaging in macho boasting. Storm thinks you're pretty hot stuff, Cajun, says Wolverine. Don't seem so to me. And Gambit being going at each other flat out past handful of minutes. Mon view, I'm still standing. Who you calling old boy, says Wolverine. Statement of fact, says Gambit flatly. So that's some good stuff. And Jubilee's up in the control booth looking down at the training session, and she's thinking what she's been thinking for a while about Wolverine in his weakened state after what the Reavers did to him in Australia in issue 251, which she rescued him. She helped to rescue him from that torture by the Reavers and helped him recuperate up to the point that he has recuperated. And she's thinking, you figure Gambit's making time with Storm, that why you're angry? Because of course this is another subplot, very, very subtle from the Outback era, that Storm and Wolverine had a little covert affair going on. Just teeny tiny hints about that in the Outback era. The heck with her. Where was she when you were hurting? What about me? Says Jubilee, always jealous of Wolverine's relationships with women. Even if I don't matter, show some consideration for yourself. You push like you're in tip-top shape. Can't you see you're not even close? Why won't you listen? So the training session goes on. This looks like the aircraft graveyard from issue 267. And again, just Michael Golden, like a master of the comics form. Great storytelling from him in his 3 pages, and great action sequence also. So Wolverine is here on the ground. Gambit's disappeared. Kid's fast, I'll grant him that. Moves a lot like Longshot. Seems to have lost a couple of steps since then. And suddenly, Lady Deathstrike appears. And this is interesting because how does she know what Wolverine was thinking and are about to lose far more? She picks up on what he was thinking to himself. Your day is done, Gaijin dog, and the time has come to deliver you to an eternity you've too long denied. And Wolverine is up for the scrap. So he pops his claws, because really Wolverine's weakness, his problem with his healing factor, goes all the way back to Uncanny X-Men 205. And whatever it was that Lady Deathstrike did to him with the cyborgs, Reese Cole and Macon, we never learned what they did to him before he escaped from them, but they did some serious damage to him in that issue. And from that point on, Wolverine's healing factor was never quite what it was beforehand. So, Jubilee's taken aback. It's not in the program who ordered Deathstrike's simulation. We can see who did it over here. It's Gambit. So he's been sneaky again. And also there's one other thing to say, which concerns Wolverine thinking that Gambit moves a lot like Longshot. There was a little fan theory that Gambit had something to do with Longshot, that Gambit was perhaps Longshot having gone through the Siege Perilous. Now, we never saw Longshot go through the Siege Perilous. Longshot kind of mysteriously disappeared, half in Dreamtime, in issue 248 of Uncanny X-Men. But as I said, there was a fan theory that connected Longshot to Gambit. And one of the points of connection is not just how Gambit moves, not just his charm with the ladies, which mirrors Longshot's, but also that glowing eye of his, the way that his left eye would glow in particular, same as Longshot. So Wolverine lashes into Deathstrike. Of course, she's facsimile construct. Gambit smiling wryly there, and Gambit uses the distraction to attack Wolverine from behind and gets the better of him with his bow staff. He says, "Wrong time for questions and to be looking the wrong way. You forgot all about me? Gotta tell you, Bo, makes me crabby." "So I noticed," says Wolverine as he's bleeding out of his nose. "For the record though, just to make this official, bang, you dead." That's a great page. Fantastic page by Michael Golden. Michael Golden really does a tremendous job on his 3 pages in this issue. And a great top-down angle there, nice little use of screen tone. Again, Scott Williams inks go very well with Michael Golden. And now we're to our regular artist here. Jim Lee contributes 4 pages to the 24 of the issue. And a very interesting layout choice from him. 9-panel grid. You don't really see Jim Lee do a 9-panel grid very often, but he's done a lot of thinking about his layout here, and I'll explain that when we get to the end of his 4-page sequence. The 9-panel grid layout goes all the way back to Steve Ditko. So we're very much in the quotidian world of the war room, of the underground facilities beneath the ruined X-Mansion, and Jean hasn't been here in a little while, and she's talking aloud to herself, saying, "Cable is right. The times have never been more dangerous, and there's still too many of us missing. Rogue, Longshot, Dazzler. Even if they've no interest in rejoining the team, we still need to stay in touch. And how better than by using..." And then she has a memory back of Cerebro, and Professor X introducing her to Cerebro as a piece of technology. Now, I do have a little criticism, even as I'm talking about Jim Lee, thinking about the layout. These little borders here, the edges of the panels should be curved, which is the convention for a flashback. But setting that aside, the professor continues explaining Cerebro to a very young Jean Grey. Murray McTaggart is there as well. And he's talking about what he uses Cerebro for, to find and help mutants so that they don't fall victim to those who would exploit their extraordinary abilities, or worse, become predators themselves. So Jean, having remembered that, puts on Cerebro. "This isn't my responsibility," she says to herself. "All those missing are X-Men and I'm not," she asks herself. Who else here has more right to the name? She being a founding member, a charter member of the X-Men. So she puts Cerebro on, but remember, at this time in continuity, Jean doesn't have her telepathy. She only has telekinesis. So what is going to happen? The astral plane. There she is. So you can see Jim Lee changing now the layout for these couple of pages set in the astral plane, and transitioning to the astral plane panels having this dark black border to them, or another way of putting it would be the gutters are filled in with solid black. but it's an indication that he's thinking about the layouts and the panel borders as having something to do with whether we're in the quotidian world or on the astral plane. So Jean here is first of all exultant in the rush of returning to the astral plane. I'd completely forgotten, she says. I thought I'd come to terms with losing my telepathy, but the pain, it's as brutal now as when I first realized I was head blind. And I like that phraseology of Claremont's head blind for a telepath who loses their ability. I think it's quite good. And you can see here shards and facets of Jean Grey in her various costumes from down the years. And then there's a big dark surprise, which is who is the big boss on the astral plane these days? It's the Shadow King. That, my pretty, depends on your point of view, he says to her when she says, I shouldn't have done this. I, for one, am overjoyed to see you. It's been so long, Grey, since last you visited. So she recognizes him, and we see shards here of who he has been in possession of. Naze here, Forge's old mentor. Jacob Rees, that's his current body there, that he's inhabiting. Jacob Rees, the FBI agent, is dead, and the Shadow King is animating his body. Amal Farouk here, and this here, I don't recognize the profile here of this male figure, so I wonder who that's supposed to be. Who else? As I was, as I am, he says, as I might yet become. And he looks a bit like Freddy Krueger there in the bottom of this particular panel. An infinity of aspects, but always the Shadow King. So Jean tries to defend herself there, but how? Cerebro's got built-in defenses, she says, which are hopelessly out of date, retorts the Shadow King. Does this hurt, he says, as he attacks her? Because he's a big sadist. Don't worry, you'll soon come to love it, he says. Pain is something I've dealt with since the day your precious Xavier bested me. So that's the callback to an old story of Uncanny X-Men 117, when Professor X took out Amal Farouk, killed him. I've grown, you see, while your precious toys have remained static. Small wonder they're less than useless. You've still me to contend with, monster, says Jean. True, but your loss is my triumph. Telekinesis is of the corporeal world. You need telepathy here, and you have none. And this, I think, is supposed to be like a shadow aspect of Jean's that takes her on then, coming out of the mirror. So very Claremontian, all of this thematic of light and shadow in moral respects in relation to people. So Jean is asked to embrace the Shadow Queen. You know, it's like her giving in to that darker side of herself, such as she did during the Dark Phoenix saga. And just at this point, as she's saying she won't, she'll fight. What happens here is, I think there's a miscommunication here in the art, actually, because this is Psylocke booting Shadow King back and his Shadow Queen back. But it seems like the tail is going towards Psylocke. Foolish child, haven't you realized the battle is over? Not so. So this tail should be going this way, and this tail should be going over here. In any case, Shadow King is delighted to see another pretty and dressed to play. How nice. Poor puny Psylocke, he says. Do you truly believe your psychic knife can do me the slightest harm? And I like this bit. I like this little plot twist. Psylocke wasn't there to fight the Shadow King. It isn't meant for you. She uses it on Jean, and that breaks Jean's presence in the astral plane. Apologies for the headache, says Psylocke. Who was it that attacked you? So Psylocke doesn't recognize the Shadow King, and Jean's no longer sure. My memory's all jumbled. And Psylocke says, my fault, I'm afraid. Another after effect of my knife strike. But I could see no other way to break you free. I'm grateful, says Jean as she walks away. And you see here, we're back to the 9-panel grid, right? It's not up here, but it could be. But we end back with the pattern, the layout pattern of the first page, back in the quotidian world. So Jim Lee thinking about the layouts on these 4 pages, and that's nice to see. And then we're at the last couple of pages and the climax of the issue and a cliffhanger. Climax of the philosophical debate that's been going, discussion rather, that's been going on among Cyclops, Jean and Storm. And obviously it's a little time later where Jean is saying the specific disorientation is so intense even Betsy's side probes can't pick out the information. In time, she says, it'll return. Till then, I think we'd best leave Cerebro alone. There be dragons, says Storm, in every aspect of our world, responds Jean. So the Shadow King, they don't yet know about him because of Jean's head being jumbled. But we, the readers, know that the Shadow King is out there and he's plotting and planning. And Claremont's intention was to have a final battle between Professor X, who's coming back into the continuity, and the Shadow King in issue 300. So, how do we face this reality, says Storm. I intend to put it to a team vote, whether we go on as we are, or join you, or join Cable, or go no farther. Cyclops says, appears to me, Storm, that decision's already been made. Now, it's a little obscured here in Joe Rosas' colouring, but this is the X-Men emerging from one of those trapdoors down into the underground complex, and they're in the yellow and blue uniforms, the school uniforms again, but redesigned by Jim Lee. That's them emerging out, and so Cyclops has spotted it. And Jean says, you sound wistful, Scott. And he replies, just a sudden yearning to prove Thomas Wolfe wrong. This is home to me, Jean, to all of us. So who's Thomas Wolfe? Well, Thomas Wolfe was a writer. He died young, he died at the age of 38. He was born in 1900, died in 1938. But an American novelist, and he had a novel in 1934 with the title You Can't Go Home Again. And that's what Cyclops is making reference to there, and obviously what Claremont is alluding to. You know, it's Claremont having a little literary reference here in his script. And Cyclops continues, the longer we're away, the more I miss it. And Storm offers, then come back. Worth considering, replies Cyclops, provided you put in a second bathroom. We'll leave you to this moment, Storm, whatever we might wish. Right now, we don't belong. So here's the moment. The decision has been made. They're going to remain as X-Men. They're in the new uniforms. Little comic comments there from Jubilee that she hates the new uniform. She wants her own colours back. Banshee says, suffer, kiddo. So Forge, you got us, Storm. What comes next? And Jean and Scott are walking away, and suddenly there arrives a sports car, and in it we've got Guido, the bodyguard of Lila Cheney. She's driving, but if you pay very close attention here, there are two other passengers in the car as well, and we get no explanation as to who they were. So Lila Cheney teleported from Earth from galaxies away, and she has got a message. And Scott and Jean see this happening, and Cyclops says to Jean, hurry Jean, get us there, something's happening. And Lila gives the message to Storm after complimenting her new hairdo. The clock's running, says Lila. Your Professor Xavier needs you big time. He's in trouble. And Storm, as team leader, makes the decision. Then take us to him, Lila, at once. Music to my ears, Wind Rider. She says, hang on to your hats, true believers, cause we're out of here. So they teleport, and Lila Cheney is a galactic level teleporter, and Scott and Jean are left behind. So that's a pretty dramatic end to the issue, but it's set up for issue 275. Next issue, not quite what you'd expect, as Magneto and Rogue stage a savage land showdown, and 274 really is a classic of the run, the Claremont Lee run on Uncanny X-Men. But this issue 2, this jam art issue, is a very nice one. As I said, kind of like an unofficial epilogue to X-Tinction Agenda in many ways. But something that's kind of missing here from the end of the issue is a little promotion of X-Factor 63 and New Mutants 98. Like, I mean, I would add in here down the bottom, and if you want to see what happens with Cable and the New Mutants, go to 98. And if you want to see what happens with X Factor, go to 63, because you've got Rob Liefeld now as chief creative on New Mutants and Whilce Portacio as plotter on X Factor, and you're just not getting that promoted there, and so that's kind of like a little missed opportunity in my opinion. But I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 273. If you enjoyed it, please like the video on YouTube and consider sharing it. It really does help the channel. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.